Okay, so I just got back from working out, and while I was working out, I was reading this really fascinating article called The Achievement Society is Burning Us Out and We Need More Play by Alex Stubbs. And I wanted to share it with you, and I share a few key ideas from the article with you because it really resonated with me. And I think that, one, more people should go read this article, but also I hope that this is like a wake-up call for people who need it. So first off, listen to this. We are obsessed with work. It shapes our identities, gives our lives structure, and guides us towards our purpose in life. As Americans, work is who we are. We believe that our achievements and productivity not only define us, but also pave the way for success and happiness. Does that ring true for you? As you can imagine, the author is not excited about this idea, but wants to critique it. And this amazing Korean-German philosopher, Byung-Chul Han, had this to say. He said that our contemporary capitalist society has become an achievement society, and we as its subjects have become achievement subjects. In the achievement society, we suffer from an internalized pressure to achieve, to do more, to be more, to have more. Whether we are aware of it or not, we have internalized the capitalist work ethic to the degree that our successes and failures weigh heavily on our individual shoulders. The primary result of the achievement society is burnout, the emotional, cognitive, and physical exhaustion that comes from the pressure to constantly achieve. And as implied, the correlation between what you achieve at work and who you are as a person. Han goes on to say, the self is no longer a subject, but a project. I find this really interesting because my best friend, Ayanda, who you can follow as at Ayanda Stood here on TikTok, she's amazing. She taught me about this idea that is starting to pervade so many consciousness, the plural form of consciousnesses, where essentially people are starting to overproduce themselves like little mini corporations instead of just being human beings. And how tech companies are training us in that mindset that everything we do, every time we post a video, every time we post a picture is for our brand, that our personal brand is more of an extension of ourselves than our actual self. And as such, that we become so impacted by what happens to us online because we view that as our true self, and we view our human self that is actually just in this room totally fine as as the operator of the brand or of the product. And that's why so many people feel an immense dissatisfaction with themselves and feel so much stress when they are on social media, because social media companies have created a world in which we have to basically create corporations in order to express ourselves, which is so dystopian. It's crazy times we're living in. She said this to me so much more eloquently. It was a really interesting conversation. I think it was from a book she was reading. So I'll ask her what the book was and try to share that with y'all because it was really fascinating to me. But this really brought this idea up for me where everything in our capitalist society, our achievement society, kind of measures your worth based on what you achieve. And this happens in so many subtle ways. It's like if you live in New York City, if you live in Manhattan or Brooklyn or Hell's Kitchen or whatever part of the city you live in, when you meet someone, they'll ask, oh, what part of the city do you live in? And it's not because they want to know what part of the city you live in. It's because people want to rank in their minds, oh, how wealthy are you? How much value do you have? Oh, how much should I care about you? Essentially, this happens so much at elite schools and elite cities and places where wealth is so often at the forefront of people's imaginations. And then they are psychologically trained by the society to give more value to someone who has a better zip code, someone who lives in a better area, who is a richer person. It's so fundamentally messed up. It's the same thing that happens with content creators. Someone who has more followers is suddenly seen as more valuable, as more deserving, as more beautiful. And I read this other really interesting article today that I hope to share with you as well about lookism, which also ties into this. But I'm going to get back to this because the subject right now is about the achievement society. And I would love to hear your experiences with this and if this rings true for you. So they go on to say the self is something to be optimized, to be maximized, to be efficient, cultivated for its capacity for productive output. The worry is that all life activities become viewed as lines on a resume. Knowingly or otherwise, we risk constantly being governed by the question of how is what I'm doing right now impacting my maximally productive self? This mindset infiltrates even our personal and seemingly private moments, turning every choice and action into a strategic move in the game of self-improvement and advancement. No wonder we're also stressed and burned out if you think that every single moment you have to be somehow improving or increasing, when none of nature works that way. Ayanda has a great podcast episode about this. Like, nature just exists. It goes through seasons. There are some seasons where the trees do not sprout fruit. They just have, branches. Everything falls off and it goes into a dormant state. But yet we expect ourselves to be in flowering and producing our big juicy apples at all times of the year. We expect ourselves to be constantly productive because that's what capitalism ingrains in us. It goes on to say that the German philosopher Moritz Schlick shows us that this approach to life is a mistake. In his work On the Meaning of Life from 1927, he writes, "The deification of work as such, the great gospel of our industrial age, has been exposed as idolatry, going so far as to say that this is a false prophet, that we are giving our time, our energy, and our meaning in life to something that is literally idolatrous." The supposition of that argument depends on religion. But so if you're not religious, you're like, okay, who cares? But you can also just view it from a purely intellectual standpoint, that what you devote your time to is what you care about. And if you're devoting all of your time just to self-improvement, clearly that is all you care about. And if self-improvement is an inherently capitalist thing, it means that you devalue at some point just existing, that taking breaks, that just relaxing, that somehow this is viewed as a lesser activity in the capitalist mind, when it is the natural state of things much of the time. He goes on to say, he argues that the true meaning in life can be found only in those things that exist for their own sake and carry their satisfaction in themselves, only in free, purposeless action, which in fact carries its purpose within itself. For Schlick, the true meaning of our lives can be found in play. If you think about it too, the times in our lives when we're the most happy is when we have one of those great conversations with a friend where we've been so busy with work for weeks, and then we schedule a time and then we have this hours long convo, and you're like, oh my gosh, life is worth living again, because suddenly you remember that human connection and spending time with one another and taking care of one another and showing up for each other and existing in community is what actually gives us purpose, meaning. It's the way that people work their whole lives, but the moments they're most, happy about and proud about are their children being born or the day they got married, because life at the end of the day isn't about how much money you have or the job that you have. It's about the people that you love. The article goes on to say that play is an activity that we do for its own sake. It is what we call an autolectic activity. It has itself as its own goal, and it seeks no further purpose outside of itself. Can you think of some of these ideas in the comments? What are some of your own activities that have no purpose other than just the mere fact of itself, building a puzzle or watching a TV show with someone you love? When we play, we are guided by the spirit of passion and joy found in the activity. In play, we are not motivated by external rewards or instrumentality. We are not driven by performance or external purpose. We don't play to be productive or to self-optimize. We play purely for the sake of itself. One of the things that I really appreciate about the article is that it notes that all of us, in some degree or another, at really early stages of our lives, when we were quite young, knew this as an inherent part of ourselves, because as our brain is forming and as neurons are developing, and as our, in those first, I think your brain develops all the way until you're 25, but the most important years are I believe 1 through 7. I think 1 through 5 is when your dialect and language and all that stuff is forming, but also during those first few years, when you're a little baby, all of the neurons are firing and synapses are joining, because you're learning literally everything about the world, from your first words to how tactile touch works to who your caregivers are, who you can trust, all these different things. And so one of the ways that children learn is through games, through play. You probably remember when you were little going to recess or playing outside with your friends. Even a lot of the games that we play as children, whether they're video games or board games or school games, they have some sort of moral or intellectual purpose that teaches us the structure and order of our society, how the world works, what consequences are, what happens if you don't show up for your teammates, things like that. And so the spontaneous way in which we played as children that didn't have a purpose, this play in which we were just doing it for the sake of inventing things, being creative, making art, making up our own games, they might have been tied into loosely to the rules of how the society functions, but more likely than not, the child's not cognizantly or consciously thinking about these things, and they're just playing for play's sake, because it's what children do. And the author is arguing that we as a society we've lost that. We've lost this innate knowledge that play and just invention and just creation together is what makes us human. They go on to say the child has no use for their play. Their rigid expectations of productivity and efficiency don't really mean anything to them. The child sees nothing before them other than their own presence in the world. The play of the child is the purest form of joy, not merely because they are a child, but because they are wholly enthralled by the moment-to-moment experience. And it is our job as adults to refine that for ourselves in our own activities, in activities we do with our loved ones, with our partner, with our children, with our friends, refinding the play and the joy and the love where we're doing the activity for the togetherness and the sake of the activity and not for some end, to like learn some skill or to become more efficient at something or to become smarter at something, but just enjoying it for enjoyment's sake, because that is what actually makes a life worth living. I'm out of time, but if you would like to hear more on this subject, I'm happy to talk more.